Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Today's episode is more graphic than usual, and I want to give an additional trigger warning for rape and gang rape. Listener discretion is strongly advised. On October 1st, 1987, a young woman named Corinna Mullen began moving her things back to her parents' home in Rockport, Kentucky. She had not made the decision lightly, after having moved out on her own with her 2-year-old daughter just 6 months earlier. Corinna left her daughter with her parents for the night, then went back to Central City, just about 15 minutes from Rockport, to keep packing up her apartment. Her dad was planning on coming in the morning to help her bring the rest of her belongings back to the family home. But that would never happen. The next morning, a Central City municipal employee working behind a city-owned parking garage came across an old Pontiac. It seemed to have been dumped there. And when he looked closer, he saw blood dripping out of the trunk. The employee contacted police, and not long after, an officer showed up on scene who called a locksmith. The trunk of the battered old Pontiac was popped open. Inside, they found the brutalized, naked body of 20-year-old Corinna Mullen, wrapped in a blanket. Lying in the fetal position, Corinna's body was so battered, officers on scene were not even sure of her race. The savage attack was shocking. This kind of brutality is often seen as personal. But who would want to kill the young mother? It would be almost 20 years for investigators to discover the truth of Corinna Mullen's final horrific moments. Welcome to episode 163, The Mysterious Murder of Corinna Mullen. In the early 19th century, a group of settlers moved to western Kentucky, where they started building a village on a 200-acre section of land. This area was located right off the Green River and was in abundance of coal and iron ore. By 1826, the village was established as Moore's Head Horse Mill, named after local resident Charles Moore's steam-powered grist mill. Nearly 50 years later, in 1872, the Owensboro and Russellville Railroad was completed. The following year, Moore's Head Horse Mill was renamed Stroud City after landowner John Stroud. Then that same year, DuPont's Central Coal and Iron Company moved in, providing lots of employment opportunities. The abundance of coal and iron ore, the railroad, and the direct access to the Green River led to the area quickly growing in size. By 1882, DuPont's Central Coal and Iron Company was so vital to the economy that Stroud City was reincorporated as Central City. They have not gone through another name change since. By the 1980s, coal still played a large part in Central City, which had less than 6,000 residents. While it was the biggest city in Muhlenberg County, it remained the epitome of a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. It felt like the perfect place to raise a child, small enough to feel safe while providing more things to do than in the other tiny towns that dot the Green River. It was for those reasons that 20-year-old Corinna Mullen moved to Central City in the spring of 1987. She wanted to provide a better life for her 2-year-old daughter. 6 months later in the fall, Corinna no longer wanted to live in Central City. She was ready to move back home to her parents' rural home. On October 1st, Corinna moved some of her stuff back to her parents' place. She left her daughter there for the night, then went back to Central City. She still had a few things to pack up. Her dad said he would come by in the morning to help move the rest of her stuff. But the next morning, an employee of the city's municipal department, working behind a city-owned parking garage, came across a 1977 Pontiac, seemingly abandoned. Looking closer at the car that was parked haphazardly, the employee thought that blood seemed to be dripping from the trunk. He contacted the police, who called a locksmith, and they opened the trunk. They found the body of 20-year-old Corinna Mullen. It was October 2nd, 1987. Corinna Lynn Mullen, sometimes called Renee, was born on September 1st, 1967, in St. Louis, Missouri, to parents Claude and Patricia Mullen. She had 3 younger siblings, Dina, Heather, and Donald. Patricia told the Messenger-Inquirer, "We were so close. I couldn't say anything but good things about Renee. She was so beautiful, so kind-hearted. She would do anything in the world for anyone." Claude said Corinna was a good kid who laughed all the time. He added, "She was personable and everybody liked her." She was a pretty girl with dark blonde hair and a shy smile. If you ask me, she looked like her mama. In 1977, when Corinna was 10 years old, Claude moved the whole family to Ohio County, Kentucky, in hopes for a better and safer life. Claude later told the Ohio County Times-News about why they moved from St. Louis. "It was so bad, one day I watched somebody shoot a guy. He fell across my car hood and died. We were scared to let our kids walk to school every day, or even play outside. We had to move for the kids' sake." The Mullen family settled in Rockport, a rural western Kentucky town with less than 500 people. In 1985, Corinna graduated from Ohio County High School. At around the same time, she gave birth to a baby girl she named Stephanie Nicole. The baby's father was not in the picture. When Stephanie was around 2 years old, she and Corinna moved about 15 minutes away to Central City in Muhlenberg County. Corinna was hoping the bigger, yet still small city would be a great place to raise Stephanie. They moved in with another young mother named Angela Smith, who lived in the Hillwood Village apartments. Corinna's sister told Investigations Discovery's Unusual Suspects that 20-year-old Corinna and 21-year-old Angela seemed like good friends. Right around the time she moved, Corinna started dating Jimmy Royce Springer, who worked for Opryland in Nashville. During the week, he would stay in Nashville. On his days off, Jimmy stayed in Central City with a coworker. While their relationship was serious, there was no talk of marriage, which was fine by the Mullen family. They didn't like Jimmy. Jimmy, at 19, was a bit younger than Corinna, but he was 6 foot 2 inches tall and buff-looking. He didn't seem like a teenager. The first red flag came the day Corinna showed up at her parents' house with a beet red face. When asked why her face looked like that, Corinna told her parents that Jimmy had gotten mad at her for wearing makeup. He took a washcloth and wiped it all off. A wet washcloth doesn't leave those kind of red marks unless her skin had been rubbed raw. By the fall of 1987, Corinna called home and told her parents she and Jimmy were arguing a lot. Claude said he thought it was time to come home, and Corinna agreed. On that October evening, Corinna brought a few things to her parents' home, along with Stephanie, so they could babysit. She kissed her daughter goodbye and talked to her dad. Claude promised he would see her the next morning to get the rest of her things. That was the last time Claude ever spoke to his daughter. At around 9 a.m. on the morning of October 2nd, a Central City municipal employee was working in the area behind a city-owned parking garage when he came across a 1977 Chevrolet Pontiac. The battered old car was parked strangely, like it was dumped there, and the worker thought he saw blood dripping from the trunk. He contacted the police, and not long after, Central City Police Lieutenant Billy Fields arrived on the scene. He would serve as lead detective on the case, with assistance from Muhlenberg County Sheriff Harold McIlvaine and Central City Police Chief Keith Nunley. Lieutenant Fields called a locksmith who opened the trunk and they discovered the body of a young woman wrapped in a bloody blanket. It was the owner of the car, 20-year-old Corinna Mullen. She was nude, and her hair and other parts of her body were soaked with blood. Dirt and gravel was on her body and in the trunk. She had been brutally murdered somewhere before her body was put in the trunk and her car was left behind the parking garage. An autopsy determined that Corinna's injuries were extraordinarily brutal. Her body had been mutilated. She suffered defensive wounds to her wrists, fingertips, and palms, and had bruises on her arms and back. There were also bruises on Corinna's legs, which had come from someone prying her legs apart with 2 hands. She had been sexually assaulted and impaled with some sort of sharp metal instrument or object, and one of Corinna's nipples had been cut off. There were tears and 1 deep laceration on her vagina. No semen was evident, but a rape kit was done. Corinna suffered multiple severe face, head, and neck injuries, which were caused by a blunt instrument. She also had 2 stab wounds to her neck, and her throat was slit. The injuries on her neck and throat were so horrible it was difficult for the coroner to see where the injuries began and ended. Corinna had died from asphyxiation, choking on her own blood, which came from trauma to her neck and face. The messenger reported that the way the bone in her neck was broken, the medical examiner believed Corinna had been struck repeatedly in the throat with a fist or similarly sized blunt object while her face was being tilted back. Corinna was still alive when she was placed in the trunk of her own car. The medical examiner knew this because she had chill bumps, also known as goosebumps depending on where you're from, on her body. In the words of a detective, a dead person doesn't get cold. Also, for what it's worth, dead people don't bleed. The blood would not have pooled and then dripped out of the trunk if she had been dead before someone put her in there. Lieutenant Fields searched Corinna's car for blood, fingerprints, and hair. He was able to gather some evidence, which was sent off to the state lab. Then Fields went to Corinna's apartment, where he found no sign of forced entry. He spoke with Corinna's roommate, Angela, who said she hadn't seen Corinna since the night before. She thought Corinna was currently at the police station working. According to newspapers from 1987, Corinna worked at the station to serve community service hours. However, Investigation Discovery reported that she was actually working there as a clerical employee. Either way, Corinna wasn't at the station on October 2nd like Angela thought she was. Fields informed Angela that her roommate had been found dead. Then Fields and Angela went to Corinna's bedroom to look for clues. When they opened the door, they found a grisly scene. There was a lot of blood on Corinna's bed and floor. Her jeans and underwear were on the ground, and there was evidence of a struggle. Lieutenant Fields asked Angela what Corinna had been doing on the night of October 1st. Angela explained that Corinna was child-free that night. She had taken her daughter to stay with her parents for the night. Angela's child was also with her mom, so they decided to go out to a bar in Owensboro. Angela's friend, Jeffrey Boyd, joined them. Jeff and the girls popped a few Valiums before they left to go drinking, leaving the bar around 11 p.m. Then they went to Druthers Restaurant for food and got home at around midnight. Corinna and Angela stayed up for a bit watching TV. When Angela said she was going to bed, Corinna asked her to keep the front door unlocked. She was expecting her boyfriend Jimmy Springer to come over for a visit. Angela did as she was asked and then went to bed, where she said she passed out due to drinking and the pills they took. She said she had not heard anything all night, even though her bedroom shared a wall with Corinna's. Lieutenant Fields asked Angela more questions about Jimmy. She explained that Jimmy and Corinna's relationship had not been going well. In fact, Corinna had been in the process of moving back home with her parents. Her dad was supposed to come over that day to move the rest of Corinna's things. Of course, this was very suspicious to Fields. He definitely wanted to speak to Jimmy. But first, he interviewed neighbors to see if they had heard anything during the night of October 1st. No one had heard or seen anything. This was surprising, considering the apartment walls were extremely thin, not just for roommates like Corinna and Angela, but between neighbors as well. The Messenger-Inquirer reported that while they were interviewing one resident in her apartment, she pointed out that her upstairs neighbor had moved a chair, which they could clearly hear scraping across the floor. The woman said, "You can hear everything up and down." Yet for some reason, no one heard anything on the night of October 1st. Lieutenant Fields went to speak with Corinna's 19-year-old boyfriend, Jimmy Springer. When asked about his relationship with Corinna, Jimmy said they had arguments, but that he had never hit her. They had a good relationship, he insisted. Jimmy told Fields about what he had been up to on the night of October 1st. He was off work from Opryland, so he was in Central City, staying with his co-worker, Dell Duncan. That night, Jimmy, Duncan, and another co-worker named Jimmy Jones smoked some pot, then went to a bar and drank a few beers. At around 11 p.m., the three men left the bar and drove back to Duncan's house. Then Jimmy drove over to Corinna's apartment. He thought maybe she was a bit upset with him for going to the bar instead of hanging out with her. The front door to the apartment was unlocked, so he went inside, but found that her bedroom door was locked. He said he saw 2 small smudges of blood on the bedroom door, though he didn't think much of it at the time. He knocked on the door and called Corinna's name, but he got no reply. He then drove downtown to see if she was there, but she wasn't, so he drove back to Duncan's house where he spent the night. The interview with Jimmy only made Lieutenant Fields more suspicious, but showing up at someone's house right before they were found murdered isn't enough to warrant an arrest, so Fields continued his investigation. He went to the bar Angela said she, Corinna, and Jeffrey Boyd had been at. He spoke with numerous people, but none of them could actually remember seeing Corinna there on the night of October 1st. Then, a toxicology report showed that at the time of her death, Corinna had no alcohol or Valium in her system. She did have trace amounts of marijuana, which can stain your blood for more than 30 days, and a therapeutic amount of a prescription painkiller. But that was it. This proved Corinna was not under the influence when she died, which didn't make sense considering Angela said she and Corinna had been drinking and popping Valiums. It was clear Angela was lying to Fields. But why? Who was she covering for? The most obvious answer was Jeffrey Boyd. The exact nature of their relationship was unknown. It's unclear if they were dating. It's definitely a possibility according to the authorities. But at the very least, they were friends. And Jeffrey Lee Boyd was not the kind of man you would want to be friends with. Investigation Discovery described Boyd as being large and intimidating. They are not wrong. The Department of Corrections currently lists him as being 6'5" and 450 pounds. Boyd was a notorious local thug with a lengthy criminal history. In 1984, he was convicted of first-degree sexual abuse. A year later, he was arrested for illegally possessing an explosive device. Specifically, the device was a military simulator, a sort of hand grenade used in field exercises. Boyd and 2 other men turned the simulator into a bomb with ball bearings, then exploded a parked car. In 1987, at the time of Corinna's death, Boyd was running a crime ring that trafficked cocaine and dealt in stolen property. He had a firm grasp on Central City, and many were afraid of him. Like I said, he wasn't the kind of guy you would want to be friends with. Lieutenant Fields knew Boyd. He was the one who had investigated him for sexual abuse 3 years earlier. Fields also knew that Boyd had actually been with Corinna on the night of her murder. On October 1st at around 11:30 p.m., a man called Fields from Druthers Restaurant to report that he had just seen Boyd point a gun at Corinna and threaten to kill her, stating something like, "You owe us. Pay or you'll die." Fields had gone to the restaurant that night and spoken with Boyd, who did not have a gun on him. He re-interviewed the restaurant witness and determined his story to be unreliable. And then he turned his focus back on Jimmy Springer. On October 5th, 3 days after Corinna's body was discovered, Fields told the media that authorities did have a suspect, but were awaiting test results. But they didn't have a motive yet. Weeks went by and no arrests were made. Locals were nervous, knowing a killer was on the loose. The sheriff's office told the Messenger-Inquirer that they had been getting a lot of calls from people who were worried. Store owners who kept late hours asked the police for more protection. Women stopped doing their laundry at night, and residents started locking their doors. Corinna's family was desperate for answers. They put an ad in the paper. It featured a picture of Corinna holding her daughter and read, "Corinna Lynn Mullen, murdered. Speak out. Help me find my mommy's killer." A flyer with the same message was handed out, and radio station WGKY in Greenville focused on the topic in its call-in program on the murder. But no solid clues were brought in. Then finally, on December 3rd, there was movement in the case when Jimmy Roy Springer was charged with Corinna's murder. Back on October 31st, Jimmy had been arrested for stealing an expensive computer monitor from his job. According to the spokesman for Opryland, Jimmy's responses to questions about the theft led to the murder charge. The spokesman said, "Jimmy was being interviewed by our security staff when what he said led them to suspect his involvement with the murder. Jimmy was held in jail for theft, and security staff passed the info on to the police." Corinna's family was relieved that someone had been arrested. They thought it was all over. They could breathe easily now, knowing her killer was behind bars. In March 1988, Jimmy pled guilty to the grand larceny charges. He was then transferred to Muhlenberg County to face charges for Corinna's murder. His trial began on July 19, 1988. The prosecution told the jury that Jimmy killed Corinna because he was jealous and angry. His behavior had been influenced by drugs and alcohol. Corinna's roommate, Angela Smith, and her friend or boyfriend, Jeffrey Boyd, both testified about going to the bar with Corinna before midnight. Lieutenant Fields testified about his investigation and what led to the arrest of Jimmy Springer. The defense told the jury that Jimmy was innocent. He did not kill Corinna. Furthermore, the prosecution didn't have any evidence proving he had. The defense was not wrong. The prosecution literally did not have any physical evidence. Blood and loose hairs from Corinna's body had been gathered, but authorities never gave the state lab the go-ahead to test the evidence. No samples from Jimmy or anyone else were ever sent in for comparison, and worst of all, Corinna's rape kit had never been sent off for testing. The defense said detectives had not conducted a thorough professional investigation. Not by a long shot. Jimmy Springer testified in his own defense. The Messenger-Inquirer reported that he told the jury he and Corinna were real close and that he had been quite disturbed by her murder. Jimmy said he didn't have anything to do with her death. On the night of October 1st, he went to a bar with two co-workers. He did stop by Corinna's later on, but after finding that she wasn't home, Jimmy went right back to his co-worker's place, and both co-workers testified, backing up his story. The Messenger-Inquirer reported that in his testimony, Jimmy suggested he had been badgered by detectives. He said they tried numerous times to get him to admit to the murder, telling him they knew he did it out of love. Jimmy also said that one of the detectives, who remain unnamed, lied on the stand about things Jimmy allegedly said during their interview. The defense brought up how there was no official record of that first interview because the detective didn't record it or take notes, and he didn't get an official statement until October 15th, 2 weeks after Corinna was murdered. It was blatantly obvious to everyone in the courtroom, including Corinna's parents, that the state had absolutely no case against Jimmy Springer. The Mullens knew what was going to happen next, so they didn't bother to be present for the reading of the verdict. On July 20th, after deliberating just a little over an hour, the jury found Jimmy Springer not guilty. Although they had expected this, the Mullen family couldn't help but feel mad, bitter, and scared. There were so many unanswered questions, and there was no justice for Renee. Following the verdict, the prosecution announced that they had no plans to reopen the investigation into Corinna's death, which seemed kind of premature. One prosecutor told the Messenger-Inquirer, "I see no point in reopening the case unless new evidence points to someone else." The prosecutor said the case was tough to try, but he didn't have any quarrel with the job the police did. The prosecutor admitted, overall, there was just not any direct evidence linking Jimmy to the crime. No blood was seen on him the night of the crime, and no one saw him with the body. The defense, on the other hand, was unimpressed with the police investigation. They said, "I was really surprised with the way this case was handled by the agencies. Detectives had messed up in many ways. They didn't get a statement from Jimmy or even take notes during their initial conversation with him. And they didn't do any DNA testing." While not as common everywhere in the U.S., DNA testing was already in use by 1986. This was 1987. There wasn't any explanation of why it wasn't tested, but more on that later. A few months after the trial, Corinna's car was released to her family. Still desperate for answers, Claude looked over that car with a fine-tooth comb, hoping to find any evidence police may have missed. When he looked under the front passenger seat, he was shocked to find a pocket knife with hair and dried blood on it. He wondered why the knife hadn't been found in the initial search. Had he actually just found the murder weapon? Claude immediately went to authorities with the knife, but for some reason, no one would listen to him. He continued up the chain of command, getting denied along the way until he reached the Kentucky State Police. Claude later said, "We went through hell to get anything done about it." In late September, the Mullens were finally able to convince the KSP to open their own investigation into Corinna's death. When news of the knife was made public, Central City Police Chief Nunley was questioned about why no one found the knife during the initial search of the Pontiac. Nunley said his understanding was that Claude found the knife, quote, wedged between the seat, not under it. He explained, "It's possible that it could have been overlooked. With it being lodged down in the seat, it's possible that we could have missed that." The thing is, the knife wasn't the only thing Central City Police had missed. Other pieces of key evidence were recovered, although the Kentucky State Police would never say exactly what. Eventually, according to Investigation Discovery, they did announce that the knife had been tested, but the blood was not human. The Kentucky State Police told the media that while they were hoping to solve the case, they weren't sure it was possible. One detective said, "You just never know. We got in on it so late. Just about everything had been removed. I just don't know, but we're giving it our best shot." Central City Police also reopened their investigation into Corinna's murder. Lieutenant Billy Fields continued working closely with the Mullen family, hoping to find answers. Fields often went to the Mullen house to speak at the kitchen table with Claude and Patricia about where the case was at. He also went with Claude to search the woods and the city for clues, but they never found anything. In January 1989, Patricia and Claude spoke to the Messenger-Inquirer about the acquittal and the fact that no one had been held accountable for her murder. Claude said, "It's so hard. Truthfully, we're not doing too good. We're just trying to make it day to day." Patricia added, "As far as missing her, I can't put into words how much we do. I just don't have any answers. I don't understand how someone can die like that, and still no one has been held responsible for it." The Mullens said they were working 24 hours, 7 days a week to bring justice for Corinna. They were also raising Corinna's daughter, who was then 3.5 years old. They said, "Stephanie is what keeps us going. She's the reason all this is being done. She seems to be getting over it. She was just talking about her mother, though, this morning, so she misses her. We don't try to keep anything from her, but we don't try to force it on her either." Jimmy Springer spoke with the Inquirer about the acquittal. He said, "I used to respect the law, but I don't anymore for what they've done to me. It's like you're guilty until proven innocent." At this point, Jimmy was settled in Central City and was trying to live a quiet life. He married and worked as a driver for a courier service. He told the Inquirer he was trying to get on with his life. "It's hard, yes, but I have to go on. I still have nightmares. I still think of the way she died, but I try to push it out of my mind. I ask myself, why was it so brutal? I hate to think about what she went through. As bad as it is for us, we know it's worse for her parents." Jimmy added, "Billy Fields and Detective McIlvaine wave or say hi to me when they see me now. I just don't say anything and go on," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. These would be the investigators who believed he was their guy. And they waved at him? In November 1989, Muhlenberg County held an election for their next sheriff. The sheriff who had been in charge of Corinna's case, McIlvaine, was defeated in the primary. Both men running for his seat were coal miners with no prior law enforcement experience. The man who ended up winning, Lyle Wayne Moore, ran on the promise to reopen Corinna's investigation immediately upon being sworn in. He told the public, "Someone is covering something up. There has to be something done about this murder." Sheriff Moore kept his promise. As soon as he took office, in January 1990, he reopened Corinna's case and assigned Detective Terry Arnett to lead the investigation. It wasn't long before Arnett told the public the case had been reopened, and he asked anyone with information to call in. In June 1991, Moore spoke with the Messenger-Inquirer about the investigation. He stated that he had received 3 anonymous telephone calls warning him to back off his investigation. Sheriff Moore said the first caller wanted to know why we were meddling in the case. I told him I wanted the case solved. He told me to take his advice and stay out of it, or I'd find my ass in the Green River. I told him I could swim and hung up. The second caller warned Moore to leave things alone or somebody is fixing to tear your ass up. The last threat warned that the sheriff's family might be targeted unless he closed the investigation. They told him to think about how much he cared about his wife and kids. Sheriff Moore told the Inquirer, "Hell or high water won't stop me. People are starting to sweat. I think some people are really getting scared. We've got some good leads, but that's all they are right now. It's circumstantial stuff, but we're in too deep to back out now." He added that he did take precautions to keep his family safe. At this time, the Kentucky State Police investigation was also going on. The KSP told the media, "There are no other investigative leads. What little we had didn't pan out. Believe me, we turned this thing wrong side out. I hope the sheriff's office comes up with something new." Detective Arnett managed to get the FBI involved in the case. They re-examined Corinna's Pontiac and found smudged fingerprints in the blood. Arnett told the Mullens, who were elated. but unfortunately, the fingerprints were never matched. But the FBI involvement definitely helped ramp up the heat on the case. Detective Arnett also kept looking hard for the physical evidence gathered in the case. He wanted to see if any of it could be sent off for testing, but none of the evidence was where it should have been. Arnett tracked down the evidence logs and found out that Lieutenant Billy Fields, the first officer who had been on scene, had signed out 18 pieces of evidence on August 8, 1988, which was right after Springer's trial. Arnett then discovered that Fields never requested any of the evidence be tested. It had just been sent to the state lab, where they awaited his further instruction. The lab never got any, and after Springer was acquitted, Fields took the evidence from the lab and did something with it. And now we know why there was no DNA testing. There was no testing done. Arnett suspected a cover-up, and apparently so did others. In June 1992, the Kentucky paper I keep mentioning, the Messenger-Inquirer, published a piece detailing rumors surrounding the now 49-year-old Billy Fields. One big rumor was that Fields was in charge of a massive drug ring and was working in cahoots with none other than Jeffrey Boyd. However, the most relentless rumor was that Fields was involved in Corinna Mullen's murder. When the Inquirer asked Fields for a comment, he said he had nothing to do with Corinna's murder. He had only investigated it. He explained that he did know Corinna. His wife Teresa previously resided in the same apartment complex Corinna lived in when she was killed. Fields said, quote, "I knew the girl. I knew who she was, but that was the extent of it. At the time, I didn't even know whose car it was when I pulled up there that morning." Fields told the Inquirer that the rumors of his involvement in Corinna's murder were started by a woman whom he described only as a drug dealer. He said, "At my insistence, the rumors were checked out by the Kentucky State Police. They found there was no basis for these rumors." Former Central City Police Chief Nunley confirmed to the Inquirer that there was no truth to the rumors. He said, "We investigated everything we heard on that thing. The state investigated the rumors and nothing came of it. All the rumors about him are just that as far as I'm concerned. He was a good worker, a dedicated person." Fields was able to ignore the rumors, but then everything came to a head when 3 fellow officers filed internal complaints against him. Billy Fields told the Inquirer that in their complaints, the officers alleged everything from bad-mouthing Nunley to filing a false report. Fields had been on the force for 14 years, but now, due to the rumors and the complaints, he felt that he had no other choice but to resign. He said, quote, "I loved police work. It was my life, but I couldn't go back to work there, particularly with one of the officers who filed one of the complaints. I just couldn't work with him anymore." In his interview, Fields pointed out that he hadn't been charged with any of the crimes he had been rumored to be involved in. He said, "It has gotten to the point where elected officials would rather listen to drug dealers than the decent people of the county. When politics get that bad, I don't want any part of it." Fields added that people of good standing in the community had criticized him for being seen with known criminals. He explained, "Well, Dr. Smith or Lawyer Jones isn't going to have the information I need to solve a case. I may be cutting up with somebody on a street corner, but that doesn't mean he's my friend. It means I'm trying to get information." Which sounds like a perfectly reasonable explanation for a small-town cop. It also sounds like a bunch of bullshit. Billy Fields told the Inquirer that he wanted the rumors to stop. They were affecting his daughters, who were the targets of taunts at school. He said the kids were telling her that her daddy was going to jail. He said the rumors were being spread by drug dealers, their associates, and others who simply want to spread tales. The people who really know me know this is a bunch of malarkey. He added, "I just want people to leave me alone and let me get on with my life." Interestingly, Billy Fields also happened to resign the same year the FBI officially became involved in the investigation, although they were unable to make any breaks in the case. Still, it's interesting that it was in 1992 that the rumors were no longer whispers. They were front-page news in the Messenger Inquirer. Detective Terry Arnett continued investigating and was really close to a break when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Before he passed away in 2002, Arnett told the Mullen family to never give up their search for answers. He also gave his pastor, who would later actually become the police chief, his case file and asked him to keep it safe. The extent of Billy Fields' corruption was unknown, and Arnett couldn't trust anyone with his files, so the pastor stored them in his safe for his friend. Claude and Patricia Mullen did not give up. They worked on the case almost every day. They went to different agencies, spoke to possible witnesses, looked for evidence, and did everything humanly possible to get justice for their daughter. It consumed their lives. Sadly, there was no more movement in the case for a few years. Then, in 2005, an officer with the Pennyroyal, Kentucky Narcotics Task Force was talking to Kentucky State Police Detective Damon Fleming when he mentioned that a few months prior, one of his informants, a 35-year-old woman we will call Sandy, told him about a murder she witnessed in Central City. He told the details to Fleming, who then looked up the case. Detective Fleming realized the details matched the Corinna Mullen murder. Detective Damon Fleming interviewed Sandy, who confirmed to him that she was an eyewitness to Corinna's murder. Sandy explained that on the evening of October 1st, 1987, when she was just 16 years old, she was standing outside the Central City house she shared with her mom when Billy Fields and another man pulled up in a police cruiser, got out, and shoved her in the back of the car. She had no idea why they grabbed her. According to court documents, Sandy didn't know the name of the man who was with Fields. She told them that, although she did not recall having seen that man before and did not recall the name he used, she did remember what he looked like because he was a bigger guy, a real big guy. Detective Fleming then showed Sandy a mugshot of Jeffrey Boyd, and she immediately said yes, that was him. Sandy continued, explaining that Boyd and Billy Fields drove her to the apartment where Corinna and Angela lived. Once inside, Sandy saw Corinna, Angela, Jimmy Kramer, Boyd's drug recruit, and Jimmy Springer, and another man Sandy could not identify. Fields began to argue with Corinna, who tried to escape. But Billy Fields dragged her into her own bedroom, and Boyd pushed Sandy in after them. There, Fields continued to argue with Corinna. He said stuff about opening her mouth and told her that he was going to make sure she got what she deserved. Billy Fields began beating and choking Corinna with his hands while she screamed. He continued to choke her until she was not able to scream anymore, Sandy said, and then he raped Corinna. When he was finished, Jimmy Kramer and Jeffrey Boyd also raped Corinna. In the interview, Sandy said that Jimmy Springer, although present at the crime, was not a willing participant in the offenses. Sandy did not see Jimmy hit Corinna. He was trying to help her, but was unable to stop the other men. At trial, however, Sandy testified that the men forced Jimmy to rape Corinna also. Sandy recalled Angela crying hysterically from the other room. She told Detective Fleming she couldn't help Corinna because she herself was being held down. When the men were finished raping Corinna, Sandy said Billy Fields threw her onto the bed on top of Corinna and sodomized her. After that, Fields beat Corinna with a metal bar, then stabbed and cut her with a knife. Corinna was wrapped in a comforter and shoved into the trunk of her own car. Jimmy Kramer bolted from the scene, and Billy Fields ordered Sandy to drive Corinna's vehicle to the city garage in Central City. Sandy did as she was told, with Fields riding in the passenger seat. When they arrived, Jeffrey Boyd was already there. Sandy parked Corinna's Pontiac quickly, and then seeing her chance, she jumped out, threw the keys, and ran as fast as she could to her mother's home. She then said she had no subsequent contact with any of the people from that night at the apartment. At the time, Sandy only told her adoptive mother what she had seen. Sandy told Detective Fleming that over the years, Billy Fields would call and threaten her, telling her she had better not tell anyone what she knew. Following his interview with Sandy, Detective Damon Fleming looked into all the men involved. From what I can tell, he never definitively identified the other men inside the apartment. There was an old audio-taped interview with a suspect, but it could not be authenticated because Detective Terry Arnett, as well as the man in question, were both dead by the time it was found. Detective Fleming did find that in November 1987, only 1 month after Corinna was raped and murdered, Jeffrey Boyd was arrested and charged with first-degree rape. He was later convicted and sentenced to serve time in prison. In September 2003, a grand jury indicted Jeffrey Boyd for first-degree trafficking in a controlled substance for selling 2 OxyContin pills to a police informant. His charges were enhanced because he was a first-degree persistent felony offender. At that point, he had prior convictions for rape, sexual abuse, and theft. In December 2003, Jeff Boyd's trial for trafficking was scheduled to begin. Right after the jury was selected, Boyd, a 6'5" and 450-pound man, got out of his chair and overturned the defense table and disobeyed the judge's orders to sit down. He was then tasered by courtroom officers, and the judge had to declare a mistrial. The retrial began in March 2004. This time Boyd was shackled under the table because he made comments about disrupting this trial in a violent way if he didn't like the outcome. In one recorded phone call, Jeff Boyd told someone that if the trial ended in a bad way, he would have a license to kill them. He also said he would flee if he was released on bond. So naturally, he never got bond before trial. Jeffrey Boyd was convicted of trafficking and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years instead of 10 for being a persistent felony offender. Detective Damon Fleming found that Jeff Boyd's recruit Jimmy Kramer had a lengthy criminal history dating back to 1989. He had been convicted of at least 8 felonies, including promoting contraband, criminal possession of a forged instrument, assault, theft, and wanton endangerment. Corinna's old boyfriend Jimmy Springer had also been racking up charges. In 1992, he was convicted of trafficking marijuana. 5 years later, he was convicted of burglary. That same year, Jimmy had a friend drive him to a gas station to commit a robbery. Jimmy went inside, pepper-sprayed the cashier, and then took money from his pocket. When he was caught and arrested, Jimmy lied about his name. He was charged with second-degree robbery, second-degree assault, and entering a false name on a federal print card. In November 1997, Jimmy pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 26 years. Detective Damon Fleming set out to re-interview all the witnesses he could. He later testified that a few people refused to speak to him, including Jimmy Springer. But others did talk. Fleming spoke with 2 witnesses who saw Billy Fields and Jeff Boyd near the parking garage where Corinna's body had been found. One witness was helping to close his father's business when he saw Fields and Boyd walking together near the garage at about 1 a.m. The other witness was Central City Police Officer Michael Phillips. He saw Jeffrey Boyd walking toward the garage at around 3 a.m. Detective Fleming spoke to the man who witnessed Boyd threatened to kill Corinna in the Druthers restaurant parking lot on the night of her murder. The man said he called the police immediately after witnessing the threat and spoke to Lieutenant Billy Fields. Although the station was a short drive away, Fields didn't get there for 15 to 20 minutes. During that time that it took for Fields to show up, Boyd parked his vehicle across from the restaurant. His mother arrived, and there was a transfer made between the cars. When Lieutenant Fields finally showed up, Boyd waved his hands to show that he didn't have the gun. Billy Fields let Jeffrey Boyd go. Detective Fleming found out that on October 1st, 1987, Corinna spent the day working at the Central City Police Station. Before she left, Corinna asked Officer John Scott if she could trust him. He said yes, and she told him that her boyfriend Jimmy Springer, a friend named Jeffrey Boyd, and Springer's co-worker, Dale Duncan, were involved in criminal activity involving illegal drugs and stolen property. Later that day, Officer John Scott told Lieutenant Billy Fields about what Corinna had said. Fields outranked him, and naturally he went to him for advice about Corinna's allegations against the men. He had no idea what he had just done. Since Billy Fields was working with Boyd, he knew that soon Corinna could connect all of them if she wanted to, and Billy Fields couldn't have that. Corinna's apartment manager and one of her former neighbors both told Detective Fleming that Corinna had also been dating Billy Fields at the time of her murder. His cruiser and personal car had been seen at her apartment on several occasions. The manager and neighbor had seen Corinna and Billy Fields together at the complex. Jimmy Kramer and Jeffrey Boyd had been there as well, they said. The manager told Fleming it was actually Billy Fields who asked him to let Corinna stay in the complex with Angela, even though Corinna wasn't actually on the lease. The manager said after Corinna moved in, they grew close and would often talk. In September, Corinna went to the manager and said she thought she was pregnant with Billy Fields' baby. She was upset and didn't know what to do. Even worse, the neighbor had seen Corinna's car backed up to her apartment on the night of the murder, and as she looked around the parking lot, she saw Billy Fields' police cruiser. When Fleming asked the neighbor and apartment manager why they hadn't said anything before, both of them said they were too scared. One of the lead investigators was involved in the murder. Who were they supposed to go to? Billy Fields had likely intimidated everyone at that apartment complex during his initial round of questioning. Some of them knew Fields was there that night, but they didn't dare speak up. That's why no one had heard or seen anything. It also now made sense why Angela Smith lied about going out drinking before Corinna's murder. She couldn't tell the truth about what she witnessed or heard. It might have been plausible to sleep through her friend's violent rape and murder if she was drunk and had taken several Valiums. If she had told anyone, she probably would have been killed next. On November 2nd, 2006, Detective Damon Fleming felt like he finally had enough to arrest Corinna's murderers. That day, Billy Fields, Jimmy Kramer, and Angela Smith were all arrested. 63-year-old Fields was charged with murder and rape for Corinna, kidnapping and sodomy for Sandy, and tampering with evidence for disposing of evidence in Corinna's case while he was still a police officer. Billy Fields told the detective that he knew Corinna from her time working at the police station, but he denied having a relationship with her. When confronted with evidence that two witnesses had seen his police cruiser at her apartment on the night of the murder, Fields denied ever going there. Fields said he didn't have anything to do with Corinna's murder. He was at home with his family that night. Fields explained that he did investigate her murder. He collected evidence and sent it off for testing and conducted interviews. When asked if he picked up the evidence from the lab at a later date, Fields, who appeared agitated, said he couldn't remember, but he knew he usually did pick up evidence, so it was possible. Fields said he couldn't remember much else about the case. Detective Fleming wanted to know how it was possible considering Billy Fields had only worked 2 or 3 murders in his entire career. Surely he would remember them all. 37-year-old Jimmy Kramer was charged with murder, kidnapping, and rape. 40-year-old Angela Smith was charged with being complicit to the murder, rape, and kidnapping of Corinna Mullen. The next day, 44-year-old Jeffrey Boyd was charged with murder, kidnapping, and rape. He was already in prison serving time for trafficking. Tragically, Corinna's mother, Patricia, did not live to see any of the arrests. She passed away from cancer only 5 weeks before. She was laid to rest next to her daughter in Sunnyside Cemetery in Ohio County, Kentucky. Claude told the Kentucky Leader News that he and Patricia never stopped trying to solve their daughter's murder. They spoke about it the day before Patricia passed. Claude, who was also battling cancer, said when he got the news about the arrests, he cried and cried because Patricia wasn't there with him. He wished she could have just held on a bit longer. Claude told 14 News, "She always told me, joking around, that if I leave before you do, I will get the person. Yeah, it's been rough the last month. Bad." Claude said the family was relieved over the arrests, but not surprised. Over the years, they had heard whispers that 3 or 4 people were involved. The only name they hadn't heard before was Jimmy Kramer. Which means they knew Billy Fields was rumored to be involved. The same policeman who came in their home, looked them in the eyes, and promised to find their daughter's killer. Imagine having to live with those rumors and aching uncertainty. After the arrests, a grand jury convened and they agreed on all the charges and added one more for Fields, Boyd, and Smith: perjury for their testimony at Jimmy Springer's 1988 trial. But authorities weren't done making arrests. On December 27th, it was revealed that Jimmy Springer had been taken into custody. Because of his 1988 acquittal on murder charges, Jimmy was charged only with kidnapping, rape, and sodomy. Jury selection for the joint trial of Billy Fields, Jeffrey Boyd, and Jimmy Kramer began on April 21st, 2009. While the crimes occurred in Muhlenberg County, the trial was moved to Christian County due to extensive publicity. Special Prosecutor Tim Coleman told the Messenger-Inquirer, "I don't think you could get a jury there. Everyone seems to know about it. It's one of those things people have talked about for years." Initially, Angela Smith was scheduled to be tried with the 3 men, but right before trial, all charges except perjury were dropped in exchange for her testimony. Jimmy Springer's trial was scheduled at a later date. The prosecution had 3 theories on why Corinna was murdered: because she was pregnant with a child fathered by Fields, because she was planning on reporting Boyd's and Fields' alleged involvement in a crime ring, and because she did not pay money she owed to Boyd and his crew. Angela testified for the prosecution, relaying, for the most part, the same story from her 1988 testimony. She, Corinna, and Boyd went to a bar on the night of October 1st. They drank 4 to 5 mixed drinks and some beer and took several pills before leaving at around 11 p.m. They stopped to eat at Druthers Restaurant and arrived home before midnight. Angela and Boyd dropped Corinna off at her apartment and then left to get Angela's son, who was with Boyd's mother for the evening. After getting back home, Boyd left and Angela went to bed. She said she didn't know what happened to Corinna until Billy Fields showed up the next day to see where she was. While talking, Fields noticed a stain on the floor. Angela said she thought it was chocolate, and Fields told her not to touch it. They went to Corinna's bedroom and found it locked. Angela used a screwdriver to get the lock open. When they opened the door, they saw the corner of the bed knocked down and blood everywhere. On cross-examination, the defense asked Angela why she still said Corinna had drunk and taken pills when the toxicology report proved that to be false. The defense was insinuating that Angela couldn't tell the truth because of her upcoming perjury trial. They asked, "You have a reason to stay with your original story, don't you?" She replied, "I guess." Sandy also testified about what she witnessed and was victim to on October 1st, 1987. According to court documents, all three defense attorneys took turns cross-examining her. Sandy was asked about her failure to warn her sister when her sister started dating Jimmy Kramer, or to tell her father, who had actually worked with Kramer. Sandy was questioned about the probability of being kidnapped by two men, sodomized by one of them, witnessing a murder, and then being allowed to get dressed and drive the car with Corinna's body in the trunk. She was questioned about both her description of the way she parked the car and how Corinna fought against her attackers, suggesting that each statement was inconsistent with the physical evidence. Moreover, she was questioned about the likelihood that murderers would allow an eyewitness to get away from them. However, the defense did not ask Sandy about why in her interview with Detective Fleming she didn't mention that Jimmy Springer had raped Corinna. Yet on the stand, she said he did. As for the defense, none of the three defendants attempted to blame the others for the crimes. Instead, they were unified in their defense that Sandy fabricated her story implicating them in the crimes against Corinna. The defense told the jury that Sandy was lying, and that her testimony was completely unbelievable. The defense insisted that Sandy had heard 19 years of gossip and rumors about Billy Fields before she gave her statement to police. In rebuttal, the prosecution pointed out that Sandy's story fit the description of Corinna's autopsy, and other witnesses corroborated her story as well, like the neighbor, the apartment manager, the man at Drother's restaurant, and the men who saw Fields and Boyd at the garage. There are always certain details that are kept out of the press so that when a suspect is found, they can use these details to see if they match the crime. Certain injuries to Corinna were not public knowledge, but Sandy knew. But the defense also pointed out that DNA and hair samples were taken from each of the defendants. None of the evidence linked them to the murder. It was still a tough case. On May 5th, after deliberating for nearly 2 days, the jury found Billy Fields guilty of murder, rape, kidnapping, sodomy, and tampering with evidence. Jeffrey Boyd was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and rape, and Jimmy Kramer was found guilty of manslaughter, rape, and kidnapping. Next, the jury had to decide on the defendants' sentences. They decided that Billy Fields and Jeff Boyd should both be sentenced to life in prison. Jimmy Kramer was given 60 years. Following the sentencing hearing, Corinna's daughter Stephanie told the Messenger-Inquirer, "We never thought this day would come. I didn't have a normal life because of them. My life was watching the two people I cared most about, my grandparents, cry every day of my life." Stephanie said that she didn't have one memory of her mother. The defendants stole that from her. Claude said he was glad he could now get on with life. He was thankful he didn't have to think about this all the time. He wished Patricia was there. She probably wouldn't have believed it after all this hard work. Claude added that he wanted to give credit to Officer Terry Arnett, who did a lot of investigating prior to his death. Claude said, "I hope he can see all the work he did." Corinna's brother Donald said, "My dad has a flow to him now, something I haven't seen in 22 years. We're going to start living again for the first time." Many people were shocked to hear that the three men had been found guilty. They felt like there was too much reasonable doubt. There was no DNA evidence tying them to the murder, and Sandy's story seemed a bit suspect. Why was she kidnapped just to witness a violent attack, then allowed to flee? There were so many questions the public wanted answered. Corinna's family has addressed these concerns in the past. Her sister commented on one blog, stating that the media has only covered around 1% of the whole story. There may be unanswered questions to those in the community, but to the family, they know the truth and know in their hearts the correct people are behind bars. So, while we may never know the true story, the family does, and that's what matters. But I will try to give you a few guesses to some of the unanswered questions. Why was there no DNA? Billy Fields got rid of the rape kit and most of the evidence. It's not surprising to me that there was no DNA to match. Was Corinna really pregnant? Wouldn't that show up in the autopsy? I would think so. But we don't know exactly what evidence Billy Fields had stolen, and it's possible her blood was not tested for pregnancy. No one was saying she was pregnant at the time, so maybe the coroner never ran that test? We know they ran a toxicology report, but I suppose unless you asked for a pregnancy test, it might not have been automatic. This is a big question mark, and one of the appeals documents stated that Corinna falsely accused Fields of impregnating her, so maybe the evidence was just not made public. It's very possible she only believed she was pregnant and wasn't actually. Without any of the physical evidence, we just cannot know. But from Sandy's testimony, as well as that of the apartment manager, it would seem Corinna believed that she was pregnant. That would have only given Billy Fields even more motive to murder her. Why was Sandy kidnapped in the first place? It's possible Fields and Boyd were on a power trip and were looking for someone else to traumatize. They were predators. But I think it's more likely they were planning on using her to drive Corinna's car, because if anyone was seen driving the car, hopefully all the witness would see was that it was a woman. Remember, Angela testified that she and Boyd had picked up her son, so she couldn't drive the car unless she left her son alone at the apartment. And then, of course, Fields could not help but brutalize Sandy as well. It was not enough to scare her. He needed to hurt her to prove a point. Why did Fields and Boyd let Sandy run away? Number one, they were busy trying to get out of that parking lot unseen themselves, and a struggle with Sandy might have been noticed. And number two, they figured she would keep her mouth shut since she had not only just been brutalized, she saw Corinna's murder and knew what would happen to her. And why didn't Sandy say anything until the 2000s? Because number three, she was a kid. They probably knew that she would be too scared. There is a big difference between 16 and 20 years old. And Sandy was a local girl. Corinna was not. It was easy to keep Sandy in line. Let's not forget she said Billy Fields called her periodically over the years, continuing to threaten her. And not only was she traumatized, like every other witness in this case, she was terrified. Okay, why didn't Angela Smith tell anyone? She was terrified. She knew Billy Fields did it, and she knew he was the lead investigator. He would have threatened her on that very first interview. Why didn't anyone else speak up? They were all terrified. It is one thing to witness a crime and tell the police. You are supposed to be able to trust the police. But what if a police officer was the ringleader in the crime? Who do you trust? Don't forget Corinna Mullen had trusted a police officer who then unknowingly told the man who would rape, torture, and murder her. Billy Fields was a police lieutenant and the man who would then be lead investigator on the case. It's sickening when I think of him sitting at the Mullins kitchen table over the years, acting like the good guy to her grieving parents. I want to scream. In December 2009, Angela Smith pled guilty to perjury. She was given a 5-year sentence, which would be diverted as long as she didn't commit any crimes before the sentence was up. Our research shows that Angela did complete her diverted sentence without any issues. She still appears to be in the state of Kentucky. At some point, charges against Jimmy Springer must have been dropped because he was never convicted. However, we couldn't find any articles detailing the dropped charges. And it is interesting that Sandy named him in court, but not in her original statement to detectives. I think it is possible that he did not participate, but he also did not help his girlfriend. It's also possible that he helped hold her down, but he did not rape her. I don't think we'll ever get to the truth of what he did in the room that night, but there had to be some reason Sandy named him in court. I find his earlier quote about his nightmares about Corinna to be haunting. And maybe he should be haunted. Who knows? With that being said, Jimmy has continued to grow his criminal record. In 2012, he was charged with cultivating marijuana. In 2020, he was charged with trafficking methamphetamine and possession of a controlled substance. And as of this recording, he's in jail for a DUI in Muhlenberg County. In August 2011, Jeffrey Boyd, Billy Fields, and Jimmy Kramer appealed their convictions and sentences. Their appeal was denied, and all subsequent attempts have been unsuccessful. They had all sought to separate their trials for various reasons, such as different witnesses testifying against different defendants, which came up on appeal. As the courts put it, their defenses were harmonious, not antagonistic, meaning, despite the complicated parade of witnesses, you all did it and you all had the same defense, so shut the fuck up. Harmonious, but not antagonistic. Sometimes I love the lyrical beauty of legal language. Also, in one appeal, Billy Fields complained that his ex-wife Teresa had been on the state's witness list. Even though they were divorced, he argued she couldn't testify against him. That's all true and boring, but one of the reasons to pore over legal documents is that the devil is in the detail. Teresa had planned to testify that her husband left the house late that night and returned in the early morning hours in different clothing. That would have been powerful testimony, and my bet is the state put her on the witness list to rattle Billy Fields. She could not legally testify, and his argument in the appeal was laughed off. But this bit of detail tells us so much that the jurors weren't allowed to hear. 4 months later, right before Christmas Day, 2011, Claude Mullen passed away from cancer at the age of 65. He died knowing his daughter's killers would most likely remain behind bars forever. He was laid to rest next to his wife and daughter in Sunnyside Cemetery. Billy Fields is currently incarcerated at the Little Sandy Correctional Complex in Sandy Hook, Kentucky. As of this recording, he is 79 years old. Hopefully he continues to live a long, shitty, lonely life in prison. 59-year-old Jeffrey Boyd is at the Kentucky State Reformatory in LaGrange. Add 20 years to my sentiment about Fields. May Boyd live a long, shitty, lonely life in prison as well. 53-year-old Jimmy Kramer is currently at North Point Training Center in Bergen. His next parole eligibility date is November 2030. However, the Kentucky Department of Corrections website states they expect him to remain incarcerated until February 2048, which I'm guessing means he has offended on the inside and has had time added. If he's released, then he'll be 79. Hopefully, he will be dead by then. I don't think any of you would think I am being harsh. I have often said our prisons are punitive, not rehabilitative, and we are behind most first world countries in that respect. But for most people, particularly women, there is nothing more horrific than gang rape. It is beyond the pale. Our worst fear for ourselves, and even more so for our daughters. I don't care if they have found God in prison. To my knowledge, they still deny responsibility, so it's hard to see them participating in any rehabilitative programs anyway. They don't deserve to breathe the same air as us. They don't deserve to ever walk in the sunshine again. If Corinna Lynn Mullen had lived, she would be 55 years old and a grandmother. She not only suffered an unimaginably brutal death, she was robbed of raising Stephanie, of being a grandparent, of seeing her parents become great-grandparents, of being an aunt, of finding love, maybe marriage. She was not there to care for her parents in their final illnesses. And as hard as that is, we want to be there for our parents in the end. It's not supposed to happen this way. She was robbed of the joys and the heartbreaks of life. Her daughter Stephanie had to grow up in the shadow of her mother's brutal murder. It consumed her grandparents who raised her. And Stephanie was an adult before her mother finally got justice. I cannot imagine growing up in that kind of daily heartache. Corinna's short life was overshadowed by her monstrous death. We can only hope and pray that Stephanie and the rest of Corinna's family have finally found peace. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Today's episode was researched by Haley Gray with assistance by Andrea Marshbank and myself. It was written by me and Haley Gray. Today's episode was suggested by Jennifer Williams Schnell and Valerie Morris. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley Warner. If you have any case suggestions, go to my website and go to the Listener Suggestion tab. This is the best way for me to get to those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messages. With 3 platforms to manage, that is very overwhelming for me. I hope you understand. But please come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. I much prefer spending my social media time in our lovely group. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds, but it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say, no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, and please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm also on all large platforms like iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, and now Amazon and Audible. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.